Hello and welcome to Rosie's Preserving School. We're on the downhill run into Christmas, and so tonight we're going to be making a couple of things that are useful to have around this time. You could gift them, but they're more designed for you to make and have, for your own use at home or for parties and things like that. And I've got some other things to show you right at the end. But we're going to start off with the red onion relish, commonly called in commercial terms red onion marmalade, but truthfully it's not a marmalade. And if you are on a route to be selling your preserves, then call it a relish and you'll stay within the law. I just say that because it's one of my bugbears is the red onion marmalade. So we've got, of course, some red onions. Got my big pan, and although the recipe says to put the oil in after you've put the onions and everything in the pan, I put it in first because then you can put the heat on low, and as you chop the onions you can put them in and they can start softening. If you put them into the dry pan, you've got to wait till you've done everything else. So I've got my red onions here, and how I do these, you don't need to chop them into small pieces. These are quite large, so I'll probably quarter them, but you just need to cut them across. You don't want, you want sort of longer strips of red onion. You can make this with white onions as well if you want to. I just think the red onions look pretty, but cut it across fairly evenly and keep them in a longer piece, and then they sort of soften, and when you get to the end just cut across the other way. You cut fingers or anything. That's the rooty bit. If you've got any kind of machinery that does this, it's probably good to use it, but I don't have, mainly because I can't stand storing all the kind of attachments and everything, and they don't store easily, and they, fill up the cupboards when you only use them relatively rarely in proportion to the annoyance of having them always in the cupboard. But perhaps that's just me. I'm quite happy with my knife. If anything, I think the food processors that slice things, it can be a bit too thin at times. It's difficult to regulate. You could use a mandolin. Again, I'm a bit haphazard with things like that, so the jars are all jingling around. I'll have to move those. There's just a rooty bit at the bottom, and I'm going to take out. I've got my garlic already peeled, so I'm going to put those. I am going to chop these because in the machine, because they will chop smaller. So I'll do that in a minute. Put the first one in. Oh, I haven't put the oil in after saying we're going to do it first. So it's 8 tablespoons of olive oil. It doesn't have to be exact to the tablespoonful, but I will do it, but usually I just slosh it in, and if it looks a bit dry I slosh a bit more in. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the oil finished with. Moment, I've put my first onion in. These onions are really large, so I only needed 3. And now I'm going to put on the heat, but only low, just to start everything warming through. Because if you start from a completely full cold pan, it tends to take quite a while to get up to heat. Doing that while you carry on chopping really lovely onions around at the moment, because they haven't really been harvested that long, so they're still in very good condition. They haven't been stored in big warehouses of gas or whatever they do with them these days. I get mine in my farm box, so I'm not sure how they store them, but they're nice and crisp still. There's the next one. I always think that red onions and red cabbage are just a marvel of nature, really, for their colours and patterns. See if I can get through without my eyes streaming. I was watching Jamie Oliver doing Christmas the other day, and he had to chop some onions, and he was absolutely streaming, and it almost looked like he'd need to stop because he was really struggling. If you want to make this when perhaps the onions aren't quite as nice as they might be, there are some very good frozen sliced onions around, which of course helps no end because you don't have to do all the slicing, but it's worth looking out for. They don't come in huge great bags, so you could just have a bag in the freezer, and because this is quite quick to make, so you could soon make a batch if you needed to. I thought that might be cheating though to resort to those. Oops. Right, that's my last one, which is going to go in. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is to do the garlic, which I've got in the spice grinder, but I've got it on I've got the different top on it, which chops things rather than grinds them. So it won't take very long, but it will be noisy. Don't you look at those? So they're all in there, nice fat cloves of garlic. There we are, all done. Sorry, there's a couple of questions. Oh yes, Brenda was disqualified for entering her onion marmalade in the village show. Yeah, I'm not sure the authorities are sort of quite on it as they were, but you know, it's good to get into the habit of calling things what they properly are. And marmalade is only made from citrus fruits. Legally, its definition is it's made from citrus. So if you put cranberries in, if you put apricots in and all that kind of thing, you're not making legally legal marmalade, and you could come a cropper. I mean, at the moment, nobody's really bothering, but come the day when all the laws and everything are sorted out again, if they ever are, you know, you might come unstuck. And it's a bit like driving. It's best to get into good habits from the get-go rather than try and change the habit of a lifetime later on. So all the garlic's going in. And the other question from Liz is, yeah, if the onions are smaller, just slice them in half. I was only doing them in quarters because, you know, mine was so big. But right, that can go in the bowl to be washed up. A little bit out. Right, so then I'm just going to turn the heat up a little bit. We need the mustard seeds, so I've got 4 teaspoons of black mustard seeds here. They don't really add to the flavour because they're not ground down, but they make it look pretty, you know, they add texture and interest. So they've gone in. They will add to the flavour a little bit, but there aren't enough really to change the flavour. And then we've got 4 teaspoonfuls of coriander seeds as well going in. So the oil is already in. So now we need to give it a good stir. A big spoon to start getting the heat distributed amongst it all, and to break up the mashed garlic that I've put in, which has sort of very conveniently arranged itself in a big lump in the middle. So I need to just move that around a bit. Oh, there's a quarter there I haven't cut. Would you believe? Don't know how I missed that, but anyway. That's now super slippery with oil. Right, go back in. I'll just go and wipe my mat off and wash my hands, and then there we are. Right, I can hear it cooking now a little bit. What I'm going to do once it sort of looks as though it's come up to the heat is to put it on my other hob to go on cooking gently, because we need to leave it for about 20 minutes or so, 10 to 20 minutes to soften before we add the sugar and the seasoning and the vinegar. So you cook it in the oil, and this is unusual to use oil in a preserve. Normally I'm saying don't keep anything in oil because of the risk of the moisture being suspended in the oil. But this is a short-term preserve. This is to be in the fridge and it will last about a couple of months. But I doubt that it will keep that long because you'll eat it. But you know, it's not a long-term on the shelf for a year or more. You need to make it and eat it. But it's still worth doing, especially this time of year and in the summer, of course, for sort of barbecues and things like that. A lot of people love this with their hamburgers and so on, their burgers. So I'll just move this washing up out of the way. I've got my red wine vinegar measured out this week. Usually I do it on the hoof, but all the onion now looks glossy with the oil. It's all covered well. the seeds are distributed, and the garlic as well, which, as I say, I managed to put in one big lump which just sat there. So what it needs to do now is to cook gently for about 20 minutes over a fairly low heat. So I'm just going to move it onto my actual kitchen hob. To allow it to do that. And I will need to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't overheat and that kind of thing. Now, the next, I'm going to fill in while that's cooking with a cranberry relish, which again, this time of year is very useful to have around, but you don't need to just use it at Christmas. You can, use it during the year with other meals. You can put it in sandwiches with cheese. You can, just use it generously, because it's a shame to just keep something just for Christmas, I think, like the mincemeat really. But cranberries are a fabulous thing. I know some of you who did the course this time last year would have heard this, but it's worth mentioning again. We've got our lovely red berries in there. These are frozen berries that I'm using purely because I haven't been able to get any fresh ones, and I don't know whether that's all the difficulties with importing things and that kind of thing. But let me talk to you about fresh cranberries. They grow really in North America, Canada, that sort of area, and they grow in marshy ground. They're a low growing shrub really, and the berries grow on the shrubs. They grow literally across the marshes between the river and the land, so they're in a sort of marshland plant, and they're combed from the plants with special tools to comb them, and they comb them into the river. All the processing plants are at the further down river, so all the people who grow them push them into the river, and then they've got big wooden logs, booms that go across the river, and they pull them down the river, literally, either with small boats or manually, to the processing plants where they are processed and packed. And that's the only harvest. It's not all over the world, or there's not pockets of it here and there. And there's one harvest. When they're ripe, this is all done. They're taken to the processing plants, they're packed and distributed. So it's a bit like when the Seville oranges come in. If you see cranberries, fresh ones for sale, and you think that you're going to need to make relish or something else later in the year, next year, you can use them in other chutneys and that kind of thing. I'll just turn this down a second. Give it a stir. Then grab them. Get them when you see them fresh, because there won't be another harvest. And as soon as you see them, that's when they're freshest. So get 2 or 3 bags. They usually come in bags of about 500 grams. Get 2 or 3 bags, and you can freeze them yourself. Make what you need to make fresh, and then freeze the rest. It's well worth it, because a lot of them go for juicing and that kind of thing. Cranberry juice is very, very popular. But I've got 2 or 3 good cranberry chutney recipes that are combined with other things. So I sometimes make those for a bit of a change, really. So our lovely cranberry gets here after quite the journey. It's a very specific industry, and it fascinates me that it just carries on doing the same thing every year. But that's because it works. So what I've got in my bowl here, my can, is 500 grams of frozen cranberries. And we need to, with that, we pair it with orange. Because as I've said before, with rhubarb and things like that, orange is a great acid leveler. It will reduce the acidity of something. I don't mean chemically, I just mean the flavour of it. So the orange goes in to help with the acidity of the cranberries because they can be quite acidic. So what we need to do with this is to take off the peel very, very thinly. Just, you don't need the whole orange, you just need a sort of enough. Smells lovely already. So take off. Doesn't matter if you get some of the white bit on the back, it's not a problem. If you've got a very efficient peeler, you can use that. And then I'm not going to peel all of it because it's quite a big orange. I'm just going to put these onto the hob to start. They are partly thawed, but they can start heating up. So you take the pieces of orange and then you cut across them very thinly. So just cut them across and very sort of fine, almost like a julienne, I should say. They don't have to be uniform or, you know, pretty. And when you've got all the peel cut, you can then just put it into the pan. I know this doesn't sound probable, but believe me, it tastes very, very good. That's it. I usually pile them up 2 or 3 on top of each other because it just speeds it up. So they can go in, and then you need to squeeze the juice from the orange, but put it into a measuring jug so that you know how much liquid you've got from it, how much juice. So cut it across the middle. It's a bit wobbly once you've taken the zest off, so it's always a bit haphazard, this. If you haven't got any pips in this and some of the flesh comes away, which it is with mine, you can put that in as well. It's just the pips you don't want. So pour that into your jug. And then you need to make that up to 300 ml. I'll just check, it's 300 ml with red wine vinegar. Oh no, yeah, 300 ml. Sorry, I will stir my onions again. So I've got red wine vinegar here. Remember, I turn these on their side so it doesn't splash everywhere, and that's make the juice up to 300 ml with the vinegar. So that can go into the pan. Get my spoon. And give those a stir. And then my sugar, which is 250 grams of sugar, can go in. And then I've got a couple of pears, and these make a very, very lovely addition to this. They just smooth everything out and sort of taste lovely and smooth and kind of warm, really. So I cut down the middles, take out the stalky bits, take off the peel. Do it however you're used to doing it, you know. And then you just chop those into sort of chunks, because they will cut down a bit. So just sort of, you don't want them to sort of completely disintegrate. And the idea is to have a lovely smooth relish that isn't extreme in any way. Right, Tracy wants to know any particulars. No, just white granulated, Tracy. You don't want brown in really, because it would, or unless it's unrefined, because it will change the flavour and also change the colour. And you want this to stay sort of quite nice and red, really. I always think the pears are a nice find when you're eating this relish, because you're not expecting them often. You know, people that haven't made it, they're not expecting to find chunks of pear in their cranberry relish. I've had this recipe for years and years, and I've never looked for another one because it is so popular. Right. Across. I'll turn the heat up a bit now because it's all nice and wet in there, and it's got sugar. Last piece. Get rid of these. Yeah, well, it will look pretty liquid at the moment because the cranberries haven't popped. Once they pop, that releases all their sort of innards and it thickens a bit, but it won't be like a jam. It won't be super thick. But as we found making the cranberry liqueur a couple of weeks ago, where I'd soaked the cranberries in the vodka and they hadn't been cooked at all, it had actually set in a jelly in the jar. So it may well be that these particular cranberries, these frozen ones that I bought, are very high in pectin, because of course when they come down the river to the processing plants, the ones that are going to be frozen are frozen immediately, so they couldn't be any fresher, and the highest level of pectin is when fruit is fresh, just after it's been picked. So it makes sense that they are that, you know, it did thicken up like it did. We just need to cook that now. I need to put the last ingredient in, which is a couple of teaspoonfuls of sea salt, which is in there, which is just going in. So it's a curious mixture of fruit and fruit juice, vinegar, sugar. It's not a chutney. It's not. It's just a, well, it's a relish, you know, because it's we're not trying to make a sort of jammy end result. And I do think the ones that are sold in the shops are sometimes a bit sweet, but then they haven't got that range of ingredients in them. When you taste it, when you eat it, you should be able to taste all the different layers of flavour. So I'm going to leave that to heat up, and we'll have a look at it in a minute when they've cooked a bit and popped a bit. I'm going to go back to my, I'm just looking at my recipe. Yeah, we need to put in the vinegar and the sugar now because they've cooked down. So, the vinegar and the sugar will alter how it looks. Trev's been stirring this. He's a bit of a mad stirrer. It's all up the sides of the pan. I'll just scrape it down a bit so that everything gets the vinegar and sugar. And you can see it's all softened and reduced down, and it's all cooked beautifully. So I'm going to put the vinegar in, which is red wine vinegar, 150 ml. And that's going in. And our 250 grams. Oh, no, it isn't. Yes, it is. 250 grams of brown sugar, or 8 ounces. Now I've got muscovado in the recipe, and when I came to measure it out, I didn't have enough. So I've just done the light brown sugar for me. I mean, it won't, if you've got muscovado, use that. If not, whatever you have. So I've put the light brown sugar in, and you stir that in until it's incorporated. And immediately, as I've said before, as soon as you add sugar to something, it makes it more liquid, which it certainly has done. So stir that, it's made it a lovely colour, the sort of juice of the recipe. And now we're just going to put it back on for another 10 minutes or so, and then add the seasoning. And you also, if it needs it, you can slacken it with some water, but I don't do that until nearly the end, just because I don't want it sort of too wet. I'll leave you looking at the cranberries, which are all cooking away there while I put this back on the hob. So they just need to cook until they're, well, as I say, until they popped and sort of thickened slightly. And get my jars ready for the onion relish. I've got some bigger jars, which are the faceted jars. They're kind of like a bon maman jar, but they're bigger. They're 327 gram, I think. And that's mainly because they've got a wide mouth. And I think when you've got things that are a bit uncontrollable, you know, if you're putting jam in, it's sort of easy for it to slide down through the funnel. Anything like piccalilli that's chunky, or the red onion, which is sort of longer and stringier, then it's give yourself a break and use a jar that you can actually get it in easily. And I'll get that ready and turn these down a bit because they're boiling madly. I can hear them start to pop. So I'll leave them to that. And then for the cranberry, I've gone back to the 212 Bonta, which is an 8-ounce-ish jar. Again, I like them because they've got straight sides. You know, I can't fiddle about filling jars, and I certainly can't fiddle about getting preserves back out of a jar. I don't personally like the ones that are very shaped or got corners and shoulders and things, because it's just annoying. You know, you either have to be a contortionist to get them all back out and use it all, or dispose of it, which is a shame. And keep giving these a stir. Oh, turn to the onions as well. That's all right. To get my ladle ready for the red onion. The orange certainly smells lovely in this. If you want to, before you jar this up, if you've got some port around, then it does well to have some sloshed in it. It sort of smooths everything out and just gives it a lovely rounded flavour, but it's not essential. If you haven't got any, or B, you don't want to use it. So it's just something that you can do. You know me, you know, I could give you a precise measurement, but actually just put the slosh in. The recipe doesn't make a huge amount, so it's ideal just for Christmas. You'd have enough for going with turkey and so on, and you'd have some cold for sandwiches or on a buffet table or something like that. But the recipe also does double very well, so if you wanted to make twice as much, you could quite easily. You know, on the recipe site you can enter the amount of the main ingredient, whether you want to cook less or make more. You can put the main ingredient amount in and it will recalibrate the whole recipe for you, which is very useful. I mean, I use that sometimes. It just saves a lot of working out, because what you tend to do is to when I start a recipe, I think, oh yes, I'll make double, and I double perhaps 2 or 3 of the ingredients, and I forget about the salt or the herbs or whatever, and forget to double them, you know, by the time I've got down a list of ingredients. So I do tend now to use the recipe calculator. They're cooking away nicely. It's a gorgeous colour. Let me look at the onions. Just going to give them a couple of more minutes. I don't know about plate spinning, I'm sort of pan spinning at the moment between the two. So Rachel's asking if the onions are bubbling. They are, Rachel, not madly. I haven't got it up too high. You don't want them to catch, you know, all the sugars in and everything, and they can very quickly sort of stick to the pan. So I've got it on a medium heat, and they're just gently bubbling. The cranberries, however, and I know you're not cooking those, but they're bubbling like mad. But just have a look at them for a moment. I don't know if you can see with the steam, that will probably fog the camera lens, but you can see the beautiful colour and that they're cooking down quite nicely. Back over. My heat pad here. Who's that? Oh, Rachel's going to make some cranberry. Yeah, I mean, it's a good, with the recipe calculator is a very good tool, very reliable, and I've never seen it anywhere else. I know Trev developed it and built it and so on, but nobody else has sort of seems to have ever had that idea. I suppose because most of the sites are baking sites, and baking things you have to be sort of pretty precise, because if you make more mixture, you've either got to have more pans or increase the size of the pan and so on that you're baking in. So it's probably a bit more difficult. Well, you won't be able to see, but this is really quite liquid, so I'm not going to put more water or 4 teaspoons of water in, as the recipe suggests. You never can tell what the recipe is going to end up like. Depends on how sort of juicy your onions are, and I don't want to sort of cook it to death just to make it you know, less liquid, because once it's stood in the jar, as with all of these things, it will reabsorb some of that liquid into the onions, so we don't want it to be sort of too dry. I'm going to turn these down now while I jar up the onions. So I'm going to put the seasoning in. I've got, how much have I got? Just some salt and ground pepper, however much you sort of feel like. If you're very brave, you could cool it down and taste it, but I'm not sure you'd get an accurate. I've got about a teaspoonful of each there, and so I'm going to stir that in. And this is more a seasoning than a preservative. The salt isn't enough to be you know, madly effective as a preservative. It is to adjust the taste. So my spoon. Big jars. And it's the same as every other preserve we do, just pour it in right up to the top. Look for air pockets and use something to, you know, give them a poke to release them. You don't want air pockets in. This is sliding through quite well. I'm going to use my preserving. This is what I use on my big preserving jars when I use the pressure canner, and it's quite good because it's plastic, so it's very good at sort of sliding down the jar. So there it is in the jar. Let me put it over there so I'm not moving it around and you can see it. don't know how many jars this will make of these jars, because these are quite big. If you think you've got too much liquid, then just drain, you know, the onions out a bit and leave some of it behind. If you, but as I say, it will take up liquid while it's in the jar. Oh yeah, Tracy did a mincemeat with the knife. It is good. And now, I mean, I can do it down through the funnel to sort of, which helps poke the rest of the onions in as well. Once you make a bit of room by releasing the air, you often have to top the jars up. I don't think that one's quite up to the top, so I'll put a bit more in that one. I'm going to get one more jar out of this, but these jars are slightly bigger than I normally use. The recipe I've done for you, I did use the recipe calculator to halve the one that's on my recipe site, because it was 2.5 kilos of onions, I think, and I just didn't want to be making you wait while I sliced 2.5 kilos of onions. So if you use the one off the site, it does make a bigger amount. Right, that's about it, I think. Let's go around and check that one. Put on my lids. I hope you can see all right. I've got a lot of interference on my screen tonight. I don't know whether it's the wind or what, whether wind does affect computer screens. I've got no idea. But so just put the lids on and leave it to cool. And I'm going to do exactly the same with my red onion, not red onion, my cranberry relish, which is now, they've burst, they've thickened, they look luscious and just right. And the steam's reduced a bit. We can have a look at how they look in the pan. You can see there the pear is still in pieces, and that's because we put the sugar in, and sugar tends to help things stay whole rather than disintegrate into a sort of mush. So depending on how you want your end preserve to be, that denotes when you put the sugar in. So I put it in at the beginning, which has meant that the pears have stayed quite chunky, which is good, but they are cooked. And then the relish is relatively thick there. It's got some juice, and again that will go back into the fruit a bit, but it doesn't want to be set like a jam. It's not supposed to be. Serve it in a little bowl and you know, all this well. So I'll get another funnel and another ladle. Oh. There we go. Probably get rid of this spoon as well. Sure. I only end up knocking it out of the pan, and then there'd be cranberry relish everywhere. So if you're putting port in, put it in now and give it a stir, and then just straight into the jars. This shouldn't need poking about because it's quite runny in terms of the fruit is quite mobile, whereas the onion is not quite so much. Fill to the top. There we are. And this will keep perfectly well. Should you need it to keep. Brenda's asking about a medlar recipe. I don't think I gave a recipe, Brenda. What I said was that I'd always made the mistake of bletting them, and somebody told me just recently that if you're making medlar jelly or jam, you need them underripe. You don't need them bletted. They go too mushy and you can't do anything with them. So you just find a medlar jelly recipe and follow that, but the medlars need to be underripe, which is helpful for me to know after all these years. The recipes never say that. They always talk about the bletting, which annoys me somewhat because it wasn't necessary. Anyway, I have to watch the medlar jelly recipe because I've never been successful making it. So I will have another go should I come across some medlars again. Whilst my little shop isn't open, I haven't got people coming in with bagfuls of things that they don't want to deal with. So that one just needs topping up. I think this looks lovely with its chunks of pear, its orange slivers in it. It just looks more interesting than the kind of solid jelly that you buy. Right. There's 4 jars there from that recipe. So it makes about a kilo or 4 times 8 ounce jars full. So I've got a little bit left here, which I'm going to put into a bowl. It's the brown sugar bowl I use for the onions, but it doesn't matter. Get rid of that. Scrape the pan out, get yourself armed with a spatula, and always scrape your pans. It makes them easier to wash up because it doesn't have time to semi-cook onto the pan. If you just leave a little bit in there, the residual heat will stick it to the pan and it'll take you ages to wash it. But if you put it in hot water now, anything that's left should just float off and you don't need to worry about it. So scrape your pans out. You'll be surprised how much you could have left behind. I'll show you in a minute. It's just a bit difficult to scrape and be obvious at the same time. So that was what was just left sticking to the bottom. Just wipe up a spill. And you can either put that into small jars or keep it in a dish, but I'm just going to use some of it in a second. I have talked about this a couple of times and I thought I'd make some just to show you what I do with my mince pies and so on, rather than making mince pies, traditionally. So I'll need that. I won't need that. That's a jar from last year I was going to use on this, but I can use what's left in the pan that I've just scraped out. So I've made some mince pies. which are these. The cranberry relish will keep for a year. It will be fine. It's fairly acidic, so you know, it's quite safe. So I said to you before about I just cut squares of pastry and push them into a tin like that. So this one has got 18 holes. So this was one bake, what I've got on the table here. I've used phyllo pastry because that is the most difficult, really. Although you can buy it, and I did buy it. I mean, nobody makes phyllo pastry, I don't think. It is fiddly, but I thought I would do the most fiddly. And this whole tray took me about 20 minutes to assemble, which is fairly lengthy. But you cut squares of the pastry, you butter it both sides, and you push in about 3 squares into each cup. Now you could just do that and then freeze them, or you, I did half the tray. These are savoury ones, and this is the mincemeat. You could use short crust pastry that you've made or bought, roll it out fairly thinly and push in the square, or flaky pastry, puff pastry, whichever floats your boat, really. You can make a mixture. I just did these. I mean, if you're rolling out pastry, again, it would take you sort of 10 to 15 minutes to fill the whole tray. And that's putting the filling in as well, not just prepping the phyllo, but it does take quite nicely to the tin and is quite interesting to look at. Now, this one is the mince meat, and this is a jar from last year, at least last year. It might be the year before, for all I know. I've got another one here, and I thought I'd open it to show you what it will look like if you keep it. And the butter that's risen to the top is sort of set on the surface. So don't be dismayed or daunted or think it's gone off and throw it away. It's fairly solid. You could warm it, which would loosen the butter and make it easier. But I did it straight out of the jar with a teaspoon, baked these once they were filled for just over 10 minutes, probably 12 minutes in quite a hot oven. And you can see the mincemeat is beautifully shiny again and all lovely and glossy. You just need a small teaspoonful. Don't overfill them, or they'll all bubble out and go all over your tin and you won't be able to get them out. If you butter the little cups before you put the first layer of pastry in, you've got no problem with them coming out at all. You could freeze them like this and then reheat them if you've got a party, just to crisp them up. But they're very crisp as they are, but you might want to just freshen them up. So that's the mince ones, mincemeat. These, I put a little square of brie type cheese in the base. You can see it's melted into the base of the cups. And then what I do, I've got some pesto here, some homemade pesto, or you can have a jar of pesto, whatever. And you can mix and match. You can put a little bit of pesto in the top and before you serve them. I'll just do 4 of them, which is rather nice. Or you could use your cranberry relish and put a little bit of those on, and they look, you know, really tasty. It's not difficult to do. It's not time consuming particularly. And then I might as well finish them off, might I? So they don't look so pale. The cheese will melt into the bottom, and that's what it's supposed to do. Don't overfill it. Don't put too much in, otherwise it'll all be running everywhere. And you could use sort of like a summer mixture or something like that, perhaps with a little bit of egg mixed in it. So that's the savoury ones. You could put a little bit of tomato on the top, or anything that takes your fancy. Now with the mince pies, you could, this is our brandy butter from last week, which is all lovely and soft. I'll use the other spoon as well. just put a little bit of the brandy butter on the top. Because I think if you've got sort of, if you're handing around lots of things, to have a whole big mince pie, you know, with a double pastry on it and everything, it's sort of quite, not daunting, but it's quite filling, and a lot of people don't eat them, I don't think, because they are just sort of, it's just one step too much. So that's the brandy butter. Hanging spoons. These are brilliant if you're having parties, these hanging spoons, because if you've got jars of things, you can put the jar out with the spoon hung inside it like that, and then people can use them and put them back. You don't have to have everything on saucers and teaspoons that get all mucky and all around the jar and everything. You could just, except I've run out of teaspoons now because I used to for one. Oh dear. You could do some whipped cream if you wanted to, rather than the brandy butter, or you could just put some icing sugar over the top. And as if you're doing them for a party and you're doing trays in the oven, as they come out, you can just put the sugar over. And I think they look sort of intriguing, and it's a pleasant surprise for people. The other item I've made with the phyllo pastry again, but again you could use any type of pastry. I've made a sort of mincemeat roll. So I've put out the sheets, spread out the mincemeat, rolled it up and baked it like a Swiss roll. And again, you can just put the icing sugar over. Hopefully I'm going to be able to cut through this without too much effort. You can either pre-slice it or you can slice it, you know, as needed. And it makes a sort of mincemeat Swiss roll. But you could have that as a pudding, you know, have it with cream or even custard. You don't have to put all this sort of leaves over the top because it does come off, but there we go, that's the inside there. And you could just, you know, have those slices that, and you could put nuts in as well if you wanted to, sprinkle it with nuts or on the top, whatever takes your fancy. And that's just a couple of ideas for, you know, parties, and or if you've got people just around for drinks or something like that. So two lovely things there to add to your festive table and be useful. And next week it's the last one of this year. And it's all about prunes. Now, trust me, I know people throw their hands up in horror and prunes. Oh no, I don't. They're only plums, you know. I don't know why everybody gets so excited about it, but it is. They make a delicious preserve of all kinds of things, and I'll be showing you lots of ideas to be using them. And they're great because they're a store cupboard item, really. So if you're a bit stuck for things, if you've got some in a jar, they'll just sit there and you can make some delicious things with them. So I'll see you next week, hopefully, and I hope there's some lovely ideas there for you to make use of.